The wind came crawling down from the Sierra ridges like a tired wolf, dragging dust and pine scent through the little town of Coldwater Hollow. The year was 1871, and the day had that cruel brightness peculiar to Justice days, when the sun itself seemed to look down and not blink. They had her tied to the hanging frame behind the old courthouse, a woman 30 or maybe 40, hard to tell beneath the grime and the rope's bite. Her name was Elara Vance, though in Coldwater Hollow they'd begun calling her the Widow Witch. The townsfolk whispered about her, how her husband had died sudden, how the crops near her land still grew when theirs withered, how she prayed alone in the hills instead of the church pews. And when the sheriff's nephew vanished last spring, a boy gone chasing wild horses and never returned, they needed someone to blame. That someone was Elara. Now she stood barefoot in the dust, wrists bound behind her, a hemp noose waiting like a patient snake. The sun carved her face into planes of light and shadow, strong cheekbones, eyes too calm. Her dress was torn, her hair a tangle of brown and gray. On her chest hung a plank sign painted in soot and spittle. Betrayer, a symbol of shame. It clunked against her ribs each time she breathed. Children watched from their mothers' skirts. Men chewed tobacco to fill the silence. The preacher wiped his brow, and the sheriff, tired, sweating through his vest, read the charges like scripture no one cared to hear. Guilty of witchcraft by deceit, by word, and by will, for bewitching the hearts of decent men and causing misfortune to the town of Coldwater Hollow. A murmur passed through the crowd. The word witch didn't need proof, only fear. Elara's eyes drifted past them to the edge of the square, where a man leaned against a post, watching. Dust on his boots, hat low over his face, coat worn from years of hard miles. Jonas Callan, a ranch hand, ex-soldier from the war no one wanted to remember. He was a man who carried silence the way others carried rifles, like it weighed too much, but he couldn't put it down. He had come to town only to trade a horse, but now he watched this woman standing alone in her disgrace, and something in him stirred. Not pity, not yet, just the faint recognition of another soul outlawed by life. The rope creaked as the hangman tested it. A crow shrieked from the church steeple. Elara's lips moved soundlessly, maybe a prayer, maybe a curse. Her eyes, though dry, found the children again, the smallest of them clutching a wooden toy. And then she looked at Jonas, not asking, not pleading, just seeing him. That was the moment the crowd began to shift, restless under the weight of its own righteousness, because her silence was stronger than their noise, because even those who hated her felt something crawl under their skin, doubt. The sheriff hesitated, hat in hand. "Any last words?" he asked. Elara lifted her chin. Her voice, when it came, was cracked but steady. "Every storm ends, Sheriff. Even this one." A murmur again, uncertain this time. A child coughed. The preacher crossed himself. Jonas Callan pushed away from the post, eyes fixed on her. The wind picked up, scattering dust between them like a veil. And that was how it began, with a condemned woman, a silent man, and a town pretending not to hear its own heartbeat. When the sun went down, the rope still hung there, empty, swaying slightly in the afterwind. Because a storm had rolled in sudden from the east, thick with grit and lightning. The sheriff, superstitious as any man who's buried too many, called the hanging off till morning. They took Elara back to the barn cell, chained her to a post. the townsfolk went home to stew their fear in whiskey and prayer. But Jonas Callan didn't leave. He sat his horse under the awning by the general store, hat low, rain dripping from the brim. He didn't rightly know why he stayed. Maybe because he'd seen too much rope in his time. Maybe because her eyes weren't the eyes of the guilty. Or maybe because he'd had his fill of watching decent folk turn mean in the name of order. The rain made the dust into red mud. Lightning forked behind the church cross. From the barn, he could hear the soft coughing of the prisoner, the squeak of chains, the mutter of a guard trying to stay awake. He waited until the town slept, that deep, sinful sleep that comes after righteous anger. Then he slid from his saddle and crossed the square, boots silent in the wet. Inside the barn, the air smelled of hay, iron, and damp straw. A lantern flickered on a barrel, throwing light across the floor. The deputy, young and green, had dozed off with his chair leaned against the wall. Jonas moved quiet, a shadow among shadows. He reached for the lantern and blew it out. The dark folded in like a blanket. "Who's there?" Alara whispered. He didn't answer at first. He just knelt, found the manacle chain, and worked the lock with a small knife. It clicked open, soft as a breath. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough, low. "Storm's thick enough to hide you. You walk east till the ridge. There's a creek. Follow it till morning." Her breath hitched. "Why would you?" "Because they'll hang you at dawn if I don't." She stared, disbelieving. "You think I didn't curse them?" "I think curses don't grow crops or bury sons. Men do." He reached for the door, rain glistening through the crack. Alara hesitated, rubbing her raw wrists. "The boy, the sheriff's nephew, he drowned in the creek, tried to save his horse. I told them, but they said I lied." Jonas nodded once. "Then you ain't got reason to stay." She looked at him again, the flicker of lamplight catching his scar. A line from his jaw to the ear, souvenir of another man's bullet. "You're a soldier," she said quietly. "Was. Then you know what it means to be hunted for something you didn't do." He didn't reply. He opened the door wider, the rain whispering against the threshold. Then came the sound, a baby's cry, soft, muffled, from the shadows near the hay. Jonas froze. Alara turned, and in the straw lay a bundle, her youngest, maybe 2 years old, sleeping under a torn quilt, and 2 older children, eyes wide, watching him. "They were gonna send them to the orphan house after," she said, voice trembling. "I couldn't let them take them till I knew," Jonas cursed under his breath. "What kind of fool brings young'uns into a hangman's barn?" "The kind who's got no one left," she said simply. The wind shoved the door open, rain blowing in hard. Jonas looked from the storm to her, to the children clutching each other. He'd ridden through worse. He'd buried better. But something about that sight, a mother standing barefoot in chains beside her babies, hollowed him out. He sighed. "Then we take them all." Alara blinked, not sure she'd heard right. He knelt to untie the little ones, whispering, "Quiet now, like mice in the grass." The eldest girl, freckles and eyes too old for her age, whispered back, "Mister, are you gonna kill us?" He looked at her for a long time. "No," he said, "we're gonna steal you a sunrise." And then, with the rain at their backs and thunder masking every step, they slipped out into the night. By dawn, the storm had thinned to a pale mist crawling over the hills. Jonas, Alara, and the children moved through it like ghosts, boots squelching in the wet clay, breaths steaming in the cold. The rain had drowned their trail for now, but once the sun rose, men would follow. The creek ran black between the cottonwoods, swollen from the downpour. Jonas led the mare through first, holding the bridle high so the water didn't swallow her snout. The kids clung to the saddle blanket, eyes wide, shivering. Alara stumbled behind, her dress heavy with mud. When they reached the far bank, Jonas hauled her up by the wrist. Her palms were scraped, bleeding from the rocks. "Keep moving," he said. "The ridge'll hide us." She nodded, silent but fierce. Behind them, thunder still muttered over the town, like a drunk not ready to sleep. They climbed through the mesquite and thorn, the smell of wet sage cutting through the air. Every so often, Jonas looked back, watching for riders, for glints of sunlight on metal. Nothing yet. The boy, maybe 6 years old, asked in a hoarse whisper, "Mister, are they gonna hang Mama?" Jonas didn't answer. Elira did, though her voice trembled. "Not if we keep walking." The path narrowed, steep and slick, and the youngest began to cry. Not loud, just those tiny sobs that break a heart more than screams. Jonas crouched, held out his arms. "Give her here." Ilara hesitated, then handed the child over. He wrapped her in his coat, the same coat that still smelled faintly of campfire and gun oil, and the baby quieted, cheek pressed to his chest. They rested by a fallen log, the light turning gold between the branches. Alara tore a strip from her dress to bind her bleeding wrist. Jonas watched her, jaw tight. "You'll need food. Shelter." She smirked faintly, bitter as coffee. "You think I didn't live through worse than this? They called me witch long before the rope." "I'm not arguing that," he said. "I'm saying the posse will track you by sundown." Alara looked past him to the horizon, the ridges bleeding into blue haze. "Then you best leave me and take the children." He turned sharply. "You really think I could do that? Leave you for buzzards?" "I'm not your burden, mister." He gave a low chuckle, the kind that held no humor. "Lady, I carried men through mud and blood who deserved a lot less saving." A hawk cried overhead, circling slow. They moved again, higher, quieter, every step measured. The children grew heavier with hunger and exhaustion, their little hands clinging to Alara's skirt. When they finally reached a narrow ravine, Jonas stopped. "There's a cave up yonder," he said, nodding toward a rocky crease. "You'll stay till nightfall. I'll circle back for supplies." Alara gripped his sleeve. "You go back to town. They'll hang you beside me." He looked down at her hand, the dirt under her nails, the rope burns that ringed her wrists like ghostly bracelets. "I ain't going back to town," he said softly. "But I know how men think when they start chasing ghosts. I can turn them." She frowned. "Why are you doing this?" He met her eyes, calm, quiet, like a man looking at a grave he'd already accepted. "Because I seen what happens when nobody does." The girl, the eldest, spoke from the cave mouth, clutching her brother's hand. "Mister, if they catch you, will they hurt you too?" Jonas smiled at her, just enough to hide the truth. No one catches a man who's already dead once. And then he was gone, into the fog, back toward the road he should have left behind. Alara watched him disappear between the trees, and for the first time in weeks, she prayed, not to the god the town had offered her, but to the wild old one who lived in the thunder and the stones. When night came, she held her children close and listened to the distant sound of horses in the valley. Somewhere out there, a man was buying them time with his own. By noon the next day, The sun baked the land dry again, steam rising from the grass, flies thick on the air. Coldwater Hollow woke mean after a failed hanging. They said the devil himself had sent that storm to steal their justice. The sheriff gathered 6 men and 2 bloodhounds and rode out before the dust settled. Jonas Callan met them halfway along the East Trail. He looked like any drifter, clothes torn from travel, horse-lathered, eyes squinting against the glare. He raised a hand in greeting as the posse thundered near. "Morning, Sheriff," he called. "You chasing ghosts? Or something real?" The sheriff pulled up, panting, face red under his hat. "You seen her? Woman in a gray dress? 3 young'uns?" Jonas asked casually. "Passed me near Split Creek, headin' south." The deputy leaned forward in his saddle. "South? That's the wrong way for the ridge." Jonas shrugged. "Maybe she don't know that. Looked half dead already." The sheriff studied him a moment. "You ain't lying, are you, Callan?" Jonas met his eyes with that flat soldier stare, the kind that doesn't blink even at bullets. "If I was, you'd know it," one of the men spat. "They ought to hang her twice if they catch her." Jonas's jaw flexed. "Ain't no such thing as twice dead." The sheriff grunted, turned to his men. "We'll split. 3 go south with me, 3 cut through the flats. Move!" The posse scattered like hornets, hooves hammering the ground. Jonas waited till the dust swallowed them, then turned his horse north, toward the ridge where Alara waited. He rode hard through the heat, every jolt in the saddle slicing through the bruise of his ribs. He'd taken a bullet there in Shiloh. Gray uniform, close range, still remembered the smell of burned powder and blood. That same ache now pulsed with something different, something he hadn't felt since before the war. When he reached the ravine, he found Alara outside the cave, her face pale, hair wild, the children asleep beside her. She looked up as he slid from his horse. "You came back." He dropped a small sack of supplies. "Bread, jerky, water." "Told you I would." "You lied to them," she said quietly. "Only way to tell the truth sometimes." She stared at him a long time. "They'll find out." "Not if we keep moving. There's an old mine east of Bitter Ridge. My friend ran it before the fever took him. No one goes near. They think it's haunted." Alara managed a faint, cracked smile. "Then it's perfect for a witch." He almost smiled back, but stopped himself. "Get the young'uns ready. We leave by dusk." That night, they followed the river valley, keeping to the shadows. The air smelled of sage and smoke, distant campfires from the posse's camp. Jonas led the way on foot, one hand on the mare's bridle, the other on his revolver. Alara walked beside him, whispering to calm the children. Her sign, the wooden plank that had read "Betrayer," hung from the saddle horn, the paint streaked by rain. Jonas had brought it along, saying only, "Don't leave ghosts for them to burn." Now, as the moon climbed over the hills, he stopped beside a patch of open dirt. He dropped to one knee, digging with his hands until the earth gave way. Then he took the plank, stared at it a moment, and laid it in the hole. Alara knelt beside him. "You mean to bury it?" He nodded. "Some things don't deserve to hang forever." She watched as he covered it with dirt, his fingers trembling from exhaustion. When it was done, they both stood silent, the grave small and crude, but heavy with meaning. A coyote howled far off. The children stirred in their sleep, huddled under the blanket. Alara's voice was soft. "You didn't have to help me." Jonas looked at her, the moonlight cutting a scar of silver across his face. I didn't know how not to. For a moment, neither spoke. The night wrapped them close, two broken souls breathing the same cold air. Then Elara said, "You think they'll ever stop calling me witch?" Jonas's reply came quiet as a prayer. When they start calling men what they really are. And somewhere between that grave and the wind, something changed. Not hope, not forgiveness, but the smallest spark of defiance that could still warm a soul left too long in the dark. The Bitter Ridge Mine sat at the edge of nowhere, a gash in the mountain where iron and ghosts shared the same silence. The trail there was narrow, carved between cliffs that caught the moonlight like knives. No birds sang, no coyotes called. Only the whisper of wind moving through sage and bones. They reached it by dawn, their feet blistered, the children limp from exhaustion. Elara carried the youngest against her chest, the child's breath shallow but steady. Jonas's face was gray from lack of sleep, eyes rimmed red, his hand never straying far from his revolver. The entrance yawned before them, a black wound in the stone. Inside, the air smelled of rust, damp, and old fires long gone cold. Jonas lit a stub of candle, its flicker trembling on the rough walls. "This'll do," he murmured, "at least till the riders give up." Elara stepped in behind him, skirts brushing the dirt, eyes darting to the shadows. "You've hid here before," she said quietly. He nodded once. "Long time ago. Deserters, bounty men. They never looked twice at a haunted shaft." The children clung to each other. Elara crouched, brushing a lock of hair from her eldest's face. "You hear that, Lizzie? Ghosts won't bother us. They only haunt those who lie." Lizzie's lips twitched in a faint, brave smile. Jonas set down his pack and struck a match to light a small fire near the wall. Its glow crawled over their faces, the woman's tired defiance, the children's wide eyes, and the man's weariness that went deeper than bone. He took a small tin from his coat and poured her a cup of black coffee. It was bitter, almost undrinkable, but it was warmth. Elara cupped it with both hands. "When's the last time you slept, Callan?" He gave a half smile. "Before the war, maybe." She studied him, the scars, the calloused hands, the way he still stood guard even as his body sagged. "You talk like a man, waiting on death." He looked into the fire. "Death's been waiting on me longer." They sat in silence a while, the only sounds the crackle of wood and the soft breathing of children. Outside, dawn stretched its pale fingers across the canyon. After a time, Elara spoke again, voice low. "When they called me witch, I thought it'd break me, but it didn't. What broke me was how easy they believed it." Jonas nodded slowly. "Folks get scared. They'll burn anything that don't fit their shape of the world." "You talk like you've been burned." He chuckled under his breath. "Once. Wore the Union blue in a gray country. That was enough." Elara looked at him then. Really looked. He wasn't the kind of man she'd have noticed before all this. Too quiet. Too scarred. Too watchful. But now, in that half-dark mine, he looked more alive than any preacher she'd ever met. The baby whimpered, and she rocked her gently. Jonas reached into his coat and pulled out a small silver locket, tarnished and dented. "My wife's," he said simply. "She died before the war ended. Fever took her, same year the world lost its mind." Elara touched the locket, then drew her hand back. "You still wear it?" He shrugged. "Only piece of mercy I got left." Outside, thunder rumbled again, though the sky was clear. Mountain echo, or maybe something else. Jonas stood, stretching his sore limbs. "I'll scout the ridge. Make sure the trail's cold." Elira rose too. "You shouldn't go alone." He looked at her, that quiet steadiness in his gaze. "You got 3 little reasons to stay put." When he was gone, Elira sat by the fire, tracing the rope marks on her wrists. The pain had faded, but the skin still remembered. She whispered to herself, "Every storm ends, Sheriff. Even this one." Behind her, Lizzie stirred. "Mama, is he gonna come back?" Elira smiled faintly, though her eyes glistened. "He's a man who always comes back." By dusk, Jonas returned, dusty, bleeding from a scrape on his arm. "They're searching the valley now. We got a day, maybe 2, before they push north." He sank down near the fire, breath ragged. Elira tore a strip from her dress and cleaned the wound. He winced but didn't pull away. "You could still ride off," she said softly. "Save yourself." He looked at her hand tending his arm, then at the children curled under the blanket. "I did enough saving myself for one lifetime." A silence settled, heavy but not lonely. Outside, the wind howled through the rocks like a chorus of old prayers. That night, Elira dreamed of the gallows, the creak of rope, the whisper of the crowd. But when she looked up, it wasn't her neck in the noose. It was Jonas's. She woke, gasping, tears hot on her face. And from the shadows his voice came steady. "Go back to sleep. I ain't hanging easy." She smiled through the ache. "Maybe you were meant to hang by the heart instead." He didn't answer. But the fire between them burned slow, a small defiance against the dark. The next morning broke sharp and blue, cold wind slicing through the canyon like a blade. The smell of pine mixed with old iron from the mine, and somewhere far below, the echo of distant hooves. Jonas was already awake, packing the saddlebags tight. His movements were quiet but sure, like a man who'd done this too many times, preparing to run, to fight, to lose. Elira stood by the fire, hair loose, watching him. "They're close," he said, eyes scanning the ridgeline. "I saw their smoke. They've split up again. One group taking the high trail." She swallowed hard. "Then we can't stay." He nodded. "There's a pass beyond the mine, through the shale. Hard to cross, but if we make it by sundown, they'll lose the scent." She turned toward the children, still wrapped in blankets, their small faces pale from cold. "Lizzie," she whispered, "wake your brother. We're moving." The girl stirred, blinking sleep from her eyes. "Mama, I'm hungry." Elira forced a smile. "We'll eat when we find the sunlight." They gathered what little they had, a crust of bread, half a water flask, 1 candle stub. Jonas took the youngest in his arms again. "You keep to the left of me. Don't speak unless I do." They moved out just as the sun climbed over the ridge, light catching on the frost and turning it to gold. The ground crunched under their boots. Every sound seemed too loud in that dead silence. Halfway through the shale path, the mare shied, ears twitching, nostrils flaring. Jonas froze. Then came the echo, far off but clear, a rifle crack. He spun, eyes narrowing. "Down!" They dropped to the ground just as a second shot sparked off the rock wall. Elira clutched her children close, heart hammering. Jonas crawled to the edge, peered down through the dust. 4 riders below, the sheriff, and 3 men. They'd found the trail. He cursed under his breath. "They're flanking us!" Elira's voice trembled. "What do we do?" He looked at her, eyes hard, voice calm. "We buy time." He slid his revolver from its holster, and checked the chambers. Only 4 rounds left. Enough for a statement, not a war. "You stay here," he said. "Take the children through the pass. Keep going east till you find the juniper grove. There's an old trail to the canyon there. You'll know it by the white stones." She shook her head, desperate. "You can't hold them alone." Jonas gave a faint smile. "Ain't about holding them. It's about making them look the wrong way." Alara caught his arm. "Jonas, if you—" He laid a hand over hers. His palm was rough, warm, steady. "Don't make it harder, widow." And then he was gone, sliding down the slope, disappearing among the boulders like a ghost who'd known this dance before. Stood or stopped below, the posse spread out, rifles glinting. The sheriff called out, "Jonas Callan! You hand her over, and we'll call it even." From the rocks, Jonas's voice came, steady, mocking, carried on the wind. "You boys got a strange way of calling mercy, Justice. Don't make this harder, Callan. That woman bewitched you." Jonas laughed low. "Ain't no spell stronger than your own guilt, Sheriff." Gunfire cracked. 1, 2, then a volley that shattered the silence. Jonas fired back twice, not aiming to kill, just to make noise, to draw them. Dust exploded around him. The air stank of powder and stone. He ran between rocks, crouched low, reloaded with shaking fingers. His shoulder burned, grazed. Blood seeped down his sleeve, dark and warm. From above, Alara watched, eyes wide, throat tight. She wanted to scream, but the sound wouldn't come. Instead, she pressed her children forward, forcing her legs to move, one step, then another. "Keep going," she whispered. "Don't look back." But Lizzie did. She turned once and saw Jonas stand tall against the sun, his hat blown away, rifle raised, blood bright on his shirt. And she saw the moment the sheriff's bullet struck. A sound more felt than heard. Jonas staggered, fired one last shot that sent the sheriff's horse rearing, then dropped behind the rocks. The posse shouted, scrambled. The noise carried up the slope. Chaos, panic, rage. Alara ran. She didn't think. She just ran. The children clutched against her, tears and dirt streaking her face. By the time she reached the juniper grove, the sun had fallen low, red and fierce. She collapsed beside the creek, gasping, body shaking. The children huddled near, too scared to speak. Behind them, far on the ridge, a single gunshot echoed, faint, distant, final. Alara looked up toward the sound. She whispered his name once, not as a cry, but as a promise. Then she gathered her children and walked east, into the dying light. In that night, under a cold sky, she found a small abandoned cabin near the canyon mouth. She built a fire from fallen branches, her hands trembling as she struck the flint. When the flames caught, she reached into her pack and pulled out the rope that had once hung her wrists, the same rope that had marked her shame. She stared at it a long time, eyes reflecting the fire. Then, without a word, she fed it to the flames. The rope hissed, curled, blackened, and was gone. Alara watched until only embers remained. Her children slept beside her, and the stars above were sharp and bright and terribly quiet. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Every storm ends." But in the silence that followed, she could almost hear his voice again, rough and steady. Only if someone rides through it. Spring came late that year. The desert thawed slow, as if the land itself didn't trust warmth anymore. For months, Alara and her children stayed hidden in that cabin near the canyon, hunting rabbits, gathering roots, watching the sky for dust that never came. The mine, the posse, the gallows, they had become like dreams too cruel to hold. But sometimes, when the wind turned from the west, she could almost hear gunfire again, or smell that iron tang of blood in the dust. She didn't speak Jonas's name often, but every dawn, when she stepped outside and saw the ridge catching fire in the sunrise, she whispered it once, like a prayer, to something wild and unbroken. By the time the creek ran clear again, the children had learned to laugh. They built a garden behind the cabin, rows of beans and corn stitched into the hard ground. Alara taught them to listen for storms, to read the shape of clouds, to never bow to men who wore righteousness like a badge. But silence has its own kind of weight, and one morning she woke knowing what she had to do. She told Lizzie to watch the others. Then she saddled the old mare, thin, gray now, ribs showing but spirit still fierce, and turned her toward the road to Coldwater Hollow. The ride took a day and a night. When the town came into view, it looked smaller than she remembered. The church tilting, the gallows frame gone, the paint on the saloon peeled by wind and sun. Life had gone on without her, as it always does. She rode down Main Street slow, hat low, coat pulled tight. Folks paused mid-step. The blacksmith, the grocer's wife, a few old faces that had once spat her name. None spoke. None dared. The preacher's boy, now near grown, dropped his broom. "It's her," he whispered. Alara dismounted, boots touching the same dust where she'd once stood barefoot, waiting for the rope. Her heart beat steady. She walked to the courthouse steps, the same spot where justice had nearly killed her, and laid down a small stone wrapped in cloth. Inside it was a single bullet, tarnished, blood-stained, flattened at one end. Jonas's bullet, the one the sheriff never found. A few faces peeked from behind windows, curiosity wrapped in fear. Alara looked up at the sky, where the wind bent through the cottonwoods like an old song. Then she spoke, not loud, but clear enough for anyone who still had a conscience to hear. "I came to bury what you left undone. You called me witch, and he called me alive. That's the difference between fear and mercy." The sheriff wasn't there to answer. He'd been buried that winter, struck by fever. The new lawman, younger, stood near the jailhouse, hat in hand. He didn't speak, only nodded once, the smallest gesture of apology a town could give. Alara turned to leave, but as she reached for her horse, a sound stopped her. Small feet on wood. A child stepped forward. A girl, maybe 10, holding something in her hands. A single white wildflower. "Mama says you ain't bad," the child said softly. "Says maybe folks were scared." Alara crouched, took the flower gently. "Your mama's a wise woman." The girl hesitated. "Was he real? The man who saved you?" Alara looked out toward the ridge beyond town, where thunder rolled even on clear days, where ghosts still rode the wind. "He was real," she said, "and that's enough." She placed the flower on the courthouse step beside the stone, then mounted her horse. The child watched as she rode away, the wind tugging her hair like a farewell. Behind her, the whispers rose again. Not hateful this time, not holy either, just human. And somewhere in that low murmur, the sound changed, the faintest echo of respect, carried like dust on the wind. That evening, she reached the ridge again. The sun was setting, the sky bruised in gold. At the place where the gunfire had ended, she stopped, knelt in the grass. The soil still bore the faint scar of a shallow grave. Jonas's grave, marked only by a stack of river stones and a rusted spur. She traced the spur with her fingers, her throat tight. Then she pulled something from her satchel. The plank sign, dug up from where they'd buried it months ago. The word betrayer had faded almost to nothing. She turned it over. On the back, carved rough by her own hand, were two new words. Mercy lived. She laid it against the stones and whispered, "You got your storm, Jonas. I'll carry the calm." The wind stirred, gentle now. Somewhere below, a coyote called, answered by another, low, distant, tender. Alara stayed there till the stars came out, and when she finally rose, she didn't look back. Years later, travelers passing through the Bitter Ridge Canyon told of a small cabin tucked between the junipers. Smoke rising gentle, a woman's voice singing old lullabies to children who had long outgrown them. They said the garden there never failed, even when drought took the plains. Some said it was witchcraft. Others said it was mercy. Alara Vance never went back to Coldwater Hollow again. She taught her children how to read the wind, how to stand when the world told them to kneel, and how to forgive only when forgiveness meant freedom. The scar on her wrist faded, but she never hid it. It wasn't shame anymore. It was proof. And sometimes, when storms rolled across the desert and lightning lit the ridge, she'd step outside and whisper his name. Just once. The thunder always answered. Because some men die for mercy, and some women live to prove it's real. That's the tale the old folks tell, of the widow, the outlaw, and the rope that burned away. If you believe mercy still matters, subscribe to our channel for more timeless, Wild West tales of defiance, love, and quiet survival. Pull up by the fire. There's always another story waiting.